We will be starting our cabinet meeting today. It will be a discussion that will focus on vital issues of tax cuts and tax reform. It'll be the largest tax cuts in the history of our country by far.
President Trump today repeating his pledge to produce the biggest tax cuts we've ever seen in this country. Presumably, that would include tax cuts during the Reagan years. And a man who was instrumental in that administration is President Reagan's former director of management and budget, David Stockman, who joins us now. Well, for those, thanks for coming, David. For those who've forgotten, let's just remind them, put up the top rates. In 1981, when President Reagan came into power, the top marginal rate for income tax was 70%. That went down to 50% in 83, and it went down to 28% in 1986. Now, in my mind, that was the biggest tax rate cut in American history. Do you really think that President Trump can stand by his promise?
Well, he means well, but he's full of baloney like there's no tomorrow. When the first Reagan tax cut in 1981 was fully effective, you know, by 88 or 89.
was when it kicked in.
Yeah, it kicked in, but it became fully effective by 1988. The impact was 6% of GDP, which would be $1.5 trillion a year in today's economy. What the Republican resolution calls for, the plan tomorrow, amounts to $150 billion a year, 0.5% of GDP. The Reagan tax cut was 12 times bigger than what they're talking about.
But let's talk about the whole simplification aspect of it, because the president and Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, have been clear that that was going to be a part of this tax reform. In 1986, you guys brought down the brackets to just two. There were only two tax brackets, 15% and 28%. Now it appears that we're going to actually have a fourth tax bracket at the current high top rate of 39.6%.
Right. Well, the key point is this is not 1981 anymore. We're not in Kansas. We don't have 70% top rate. In fact, over the last 30 years, the income tax is morphed into a rich man's levy, and the Republicans are wasting their time trying to cut it. Here are the facts. There are 150 million tax filers. The bottom 122 million, that's 83%. Pay less than 12% of the total revenue collected. Their average rate is 5%. It's not killing anybody. The top 6 million tax filers pay 60% of the revenue. So if you're going to try to cut the income tax, you're going to be cutting taxes for the very top, and you can't do it politically. And
I would argue with you for a minute, because it's the folks at the very top, the Warren Buffetts, et cetera, they always find ways of getting around taxes. I mean, you know that Warren Buffett does that through the way he collects money from all of his stock holdings, et cetera. It's the folks who are in the topish bracket that are forced to pay the 40%, and they're not getting a cut at all. Let me just ask you quickly. We just got word that the Federal Reserve Governor Jerome Powell is probably going to be nominated as the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Is that going to be any different from the way Janet Yellen has run that institution?
It's a horrible choice. He's Janet Yellen with a tie. He's a crony capitalist Keynesian who thinks you should run the economy from the 12 people sitting on the Federal Open Market Committee. We have to get off this 1% or 0% interest rate. You got to let capitalism work. Let the market, the free market, set the interest rate. Get the Fed out of the way. This economy is 100 months into an expansion. We don't need the crutches of a Fed sitting on interest rates like they are, or a $4.5 trillion balance sheet. And he'll do the same. It's an awful choice. It proves the election didn't make any difference. Donald Trump, when it comes to monetary policy, which is at the heart of the problem today, which is basically killing our economy, destroying savers, destroying businesses, is just as bad.
So I guess you approve of the pick of Jerome Powell, right?
Yeah, right.